Well, I think people in circumstances like this frequently would say they're overwhelmed, and you say, oh yeah, well, I guarantee you I'm overwhelmed. But how could you have a better host than BNP? They turn on the lights of the Eiffel Tower for you. Well, you wonder how you ended up standing on a stage like this, talking to people like yourselves here in Paris, France, and it truly is mind-boggling. I'm going to do something which I know sometimes people consider gauche, but I want to thank all of my friends and family who came to be here when I received this award. First, my wife, who's been with me this whole journey, and who many of you probably recognize in the film with the little baby in the village in Liberia. My two sons, one of whom surprised me. I didn't know he was coming, and he flew in from Tokyo to be with me. And my other son from California, and his two children, my grandchildren, are here. And three very good friends, Shirley Longacre, who for many years was a researcher at the Pasteur Institute here in Paris, working on issues of malaria. My financial counselor, Barbara Carlisle, who makes sure that I have enough money to fly back and forth to France. And my good friend Eric Wind, who made all the arrangements for us to be here, and I want to thank them as well. And then I have one of my business partners came over with his fiancée, Peter Majoranowski. He and I are engaged in a venture to take tobacco and turn it into ethanol, sort of magic. Now we'll see if somebody wants to, now that the price of oil is going back up, maybe somebody will want to buy the ethanol. Anyway, so much for the preliminaries. I think people often say, but it's definitely true, you only live one time. You don't get a second shot. And if you don't make the most of the time God allows to you, you'll be very sorry when the end comes and you're thinking about, what did I do with my life? And most of the people on the planet are basically struggling to survive. You know, they're looking to have clean water. 800 million people don't even have clean water or sanitation. About nearly 60% of the people in the developing countries live on less than $2 a day. You know, being free from disease, inoculating children against the diseases that we don't even have anymore in the developed world. Those are the kind of challenges that people face throughout the world. However, there's a few fortunate souls, of which there's quite a number of them in this room, including myself, who find themselves having the financial resources, the influence, and the access to actually have an impact on what happens in the world. And that's an opportunity, and that's a reality that you just should not be squandered. When you think about personal wealth, and there's, as I said, an awful lot of it in this room, there's two basic things you can do with it. One is you can go out and buy original art, Picasso's, or you can get the ballet theater to put your name up on it, or you can try and change the world and save some people's lives. And they're both perfectly acceptable ways to dispose of your wealth, but I much prefer trying to help people who can't help themselves. If you're lucky, maybe you'll be able to do both those things, get your name on the ballet and help a lot of people. But then you probably have a lot more money than I do. I'm not going to talk to you about buying original art since I don't do it and I don't know very much about it. So I'll talk about helping others and the different ways that we can think about that and we might think about that. First, why do it? Well, I think it's one of those God-given moral imperatives. If you're able to help somebody and you don't help them, shame on you. Secondly, there's nothing, almost nothing, that makes you feel better than having genuinely helped somebody who was not able to help themselves, that needed your help desperately. When I was an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, I never thought about helping people. I thought about one thing: making money. That's all I thought about all day long. People would come to me and say, would you like to help out in this thing? And I'd say, are you crazy? I'm so busy, I have no time for it. But I had the good fortune to be the founder of a company that became the 12th biggest software company in the world, and I benefited financially from that. And I had no idea what to do with my money. I knew I wasn't going to buy Picasso's, but I had no idea. And I went to church one day, and the pastor told a story about a waitress who had a disabled child and a non-disabled child. And she couldn't get to her work on time because she had to go in one direction to leave the disabled child where it got care, and another direction for the child who was not disabled to go to school. And I turned and looked at my wife, and she said, you want to buy her a car, don't you? I said, yeah, I do. So we bought her a minivan, and then we discovered she didn't know how to drive. So the pastor taught her how to drive. And about 6 months later, she wrote a letter to the pastor, and the pastor, it was all done anonymously. She had no idea where the money came from. The pastor read the letter to the congregation of how her life had been changed by this used minivan. And that changed my life because I could tell that it was everything to this woman to be able to take care of her children. And so once it starts, you can't stop it. It's like a disease. And I was very impressed with the things John said about women and what we need to do to enhance the status of women, because if someone came to me and said, you can only do one thing philanthropically, one, I would say, enhance the status of women in our societies. So anyway, there are two approaches to philanthropy, even when you're helping people. The first is providing direct services. You know, you go into a village in Ethiopia, they need a classroom, you build a classroom. They need a well, you dig a well. But pretty soon you discover there's a lot of villages in Ethiopia. and I don't care, unless you're Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, you can't dig all the wells, and you can't build all the school classrooms. So the other way to go about meeting those needs is to influence the people who have the money. And the people who have the money are the governments and the major financial institutions. And so if through research and advocacy you can get the governments to change their view about issues such as trade, such as debt, such as migration, such as global public health, one of the most important initiatives that very few people even talk about or know about of the last 10 years is the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. It's located in Geneva. It's funded, 1/3 of the money comes from the US, 1/3 comes from Europe, and 1/3 comes from everybody else. And the Global Fund now has billions of dollars that it deploys every year to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria, and it does an extraordinary job. And that's an example of leverage. Now, if I went to a man on the street in the United States and said, "Do you think it's a good idea if we send $1 billion to the Global Fund?" They'd think I was crazy. They'd say, "Why would we do that? Who are they anyway?" So, you know, to guard against that and to counter that, one of the organizations that NGOs I established its whole job was to educate and convince members of Congress that supporting the Global Fund was an important thing to do. And George Bush did it. And he and his wife were very vocal in support of the Global Fund. And as a result, we kept Europe also on track to fund the Global Fund, because if we'd have backed out, Europe would have backed out. So anyway, that's just an example of, I think, how you get leverage. You saw in that little film a little bit about the Center for Global Development. It's probably the leading think tank on global poverty, and its whole function is to kind of instruct governments on how to behave in terms of the rich countries' relationships with the poorer countries. So anyway, those are just some random thoughts that I'd like to leave with you. I want to repeat again how truly undeserving and humble I feel about this. It's just, I have no idea how the bank got my name. I know this. They didn't know me very well because they had to call up one of the charities I have and say, "How do we get a hold of Mr. Scott? We want to give him an award, but we don't know how to find him." And which is good. That's a good thing. But I'm just so grateful to you for that. And I know the organizations that I represent will be very proud of that. So don't go buying any more Picassos. Do something for other people, and you're going to be very happy you did so. Thank you.